Welcome back to Service and Capacities for Apartments and Similar Dwellings, Part 3. Now we're going to look at how all of our previous work, calculating the feeders for the suites and for the public panel and for the parking lot panel, all come together to form the calculation for the service conductors. We're now going to look at Rule 8202, Subrule number 3, which is going to deal with a lot of different aspects of the entire build that we have for our apartment. And we're going to start with the suites. When it comes to service conductors, there are certain things that have their own specific rules and therefore are not included in other parts of our calculations. Some of the considerations that we need to have is that our heating and air conditioning loads, our EV chargers, and our car receptacles all have different rules that pertain to them. Therefore, we cannot include any of these loads in any of our previous calculations when it comes to calculating the service. When we look at our suite demand, we have to take the heating out of each one of our suites in order to figure out how much load actually goes towards the service. We're going to deal with the heating separately in a later calculation. Once I take the heating load out of each one of our suites, we do have new subtotals that go toward our service load. I start my calculations for my main service using Rule 8202, Subrule number 3. And this begins with the suites. Subrule number 3 tells me how to apply my demand factor to each suite that I have, and it starts with using 100% of the largest suite. The largest suite we have is 13 kilowatts, so I'm going to add 100% of that one suite onto my subtotal list. The next step is to take 65% of the next two largest suites. Since I still have one type A suite left, I'm going to take 65% of that one and then 65% of the next largest. They don't have to be the same size, but I do need to have two suites in this calculation. The third step is to take 40% of the next two unaccounted for suites. I still have two type B suites left, both at 11 kilowatts, so I'm going to take these two suites at 40%. Our next step is to take 25% of the next 15 available suites. Since I only have 6 C-type suites left, that's what I'm going to use. Once I've accounted for those 6 suites, I now have accounted for all the suites inside my unit. Once I add up all these demand loads, I come up with a total suite demand of 51,650 watts going towards my service conductors. The next thing I have to look at is my heating loads. With my heating loads, there's a few things I need to do. First, I need to make sure I add up all my different heating loads within the building as per how many there are and where they are, and I need to have a subtotal of all the heating loads within the building. With my suite A, I have 2 units, and each one of those units has 2,800 watts of heating, which gives me a total heating demand for suite A of 5,600 watts. And then I do the same thing for suite B and suite C. Both suite B and suite C have 2,000 watt heaters in them. So I'm going to take those, multiply by the number of suites that I have, and add them to my subtotals. My house panel had 4,000 watts of heating in it, so therefore I need to take all the heating from my house panel that I removed earlier and add it to this calculation instead. I get a subtotal of 27,600 watts towards heating. My next step is to pay attention to Rule 62-118, Subrule number 3. 62-118 Subrule 3 tells me how to break down this heating load towards either feeders or service conductors, and it starts with the first 10 kilowatt of calculated load. According to the rule, I need to take 100% of the first 10 kilowatts of my total heating load towards my service. This means I have 17,600 watts that I have not yet accounted for. The second part of this rule states that whatever is left over needs to be taken at a 75% demand factor. 75% of the remaining load is 13,200 watts. I'm going to add that to my initial 10,000 watts to get a total heating demand load of 23,200 watts going toward my main service calculation. Now we can organize everything as per 8200 Subrule 3. We have our suite demand of 51,650 watts. We have our heating demand of 23,200 watts. All of our EV and car receptacle demands go in at 100%, so therefore we have a total load of 16,750 watts there. And lastly, we look at Rule 8200 Subrule 3E, which tells us that any power loads not located inside the suites get added to the main service calculation at 75%. Remember that we took the heating out of our house panel. The remaining 25,900 watts is taken at 75% to put a demand of 19,425 watts toward my service. Once I add all four of those numbers up, I get a total demand of 111,025 watts. We will divide that by my voltage of 240 volts to get a total ampacity of 462.6 amps. Remember, if you're working on a 208 volt system, your divisor would be 208. Table 2 tells me in order to handle the 462.6 amps, I would need to have a 750 kc mil conductor. Table 13 further tells me that in order to protect that 750 kc mil conductor, I would require a 500 amp fuse. Now we can complete our service diagram. We know that we have the 750 kc mil service conductors coming into our service box. We know that our service box needs to be rated at least a 500 amp in order to hold the fuses. We also know that the splitter is an extension of the service conductors, so it also has to be rated at least the same as the service conductors. So I cannot use anything smaller than 475 amps. Therefore, my splitter must also be rated at 500 amps. From my splitter, I go to the disconnect of each one of my panel boards for all my suites, as well as my house load, as well as my parking lot feeder. And from there, I complete my service. So that's all it takes to calculate the service for an apartment building. We start with our suites minus the heating, EV, and car heater loads. We add it all together as per 8200 Subrule 3. After we have all that in, we put all of our heating loads together in one lump sum and then apply Section 62 to that load. For all of our EV and our car heating receptacles, they all go in at 100%, and our remaining loads not found inside the suites all get added to the service at 75%. Once you have your total loads, you divide it by your voltage to get your amperage, and then use Table 2 and Table 13 accordingly. This is the end of Part 3, and when you're ready, continue on to Part 4 on sizing the conduit for this service.